But Sunday, the 2nd of September, 1984, was a Father's Day like no other.
You gotta remember, that was marked to die.
On Sunday, September 2nd, 1984, Australia witnessed what is still considered its worst biker violence ever. What was expected to be a fun Father's Day holiday out turned into a nightmare between two biker gangs that injured 28 people and killed 7, including one innocent 14-year-old girl. The Milperra Massacre didn't happen overnight. According to police reports and comments from gang experts and journalists, the war was in the making years before the tragedy. Lost souls were allegedly involved, battle plans were drawn, and it was only a matter of time before blood was spilled. Continue watching as we dissect the Father's Day Massacre, the parties involved, and the events that led to the mass shooting. It all began in 1968 in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, when William Jock Ross founded the Comanchero motorcycle club inspired by the 1961 John Wayne film, The Comancheros. Ross was a Scottish immigrant with a tough background and a former soldier who joined the British Army at 17 years old, working as a minesweeper for 7 years. Speculative psychologists suggest that Ross was enchanted by life in the military, whose identity is often cored around loyalty, discipline, and toughness. And even though he quit the ranks, he never really stopped being a soldier. He was known to be highly charismatic and a natural leader of men, beaming with pure machismo, traits that undoubtedly helped him build what would become Australia's largest and most violent outlaw bikie club. The Comanchero bikies were unlike anything ever witnessed in Sydney. What began as around 5 motorcycle enthusiasts quickly grew in number, and it wasn't long before they hit double digits. With Ross as a self-declared supreme leader, the club adopted a paramilitary structure with organized weekly training drills. Occasional brawls against other rival bikers were typical, and Ross even took the time to plan most of their attacks with military precision. It was tough, but they loved it. Ross would later state in a 2019 interview that the club was always armed. He explained that guns were much easier to acquire back then, and the club was stacked from the very beginning. On the wall of the Comanchero clubhouse, he hung a sign that read, "If it's white, sniff it. If it's a female or it moves, fuck it. If it narcs, kill it." In 1974, the club's reputation attracted the interest of a man named Anthony Spencer. Those close to him described Spencer as a lost soul forever haunted by his past. You see, before the Comancheros, he knew nothing of family. His father abandoned him when he was only a toddler, and his mother, plagued by mental illness, took her life shortly after. Spencer would then spend much of his childhood and teens hopping from one orphanage to another, looking for a place to call home. Sadly, even other unfortunate kids didn't take much liking for him. Spencer specifically recalled one incident where other kids tried to drown him. He later bravely joined the Royal Australian Navy, aged 17, determined to conquer his fears of water, developed after almost drowning. Other naval servicemen recalled young Spencer bursting into tears of joy whenever anyone showed him any kindness. Now aged 19, after 2 years in the Navy, the Comancheros were everything to Spencer. He adored Ross, who took him in as his surrogate father and showed him the love he had never received. Unfortunately, all was only good for a couple of years until their relationship went into decline. Slowly, Spencer became more independent of Ross's approval. He now had others to call brothers and even maintained a happy relationship with a girlfriend. It also didn't help that because of his past experiences, Spencer was an extreme alcoholic and pothead. However, the final nail in the coffin was hit when he was not invited to Ross's second wedding. Ross's bride vetoed against him having Spencer at their wedding because he is always stoned and you know how stupid he gets. I'm not going to have him ruin my wedding. It was around this time that the Comancheros bikie club started suffering. Even Ross's wife noticed something was off. It was the beginning of the end. Several theories have been thrown around regarding what caused the ever-strong and tightly bound Comancheros to crumble. In an interview in late 1983, former Comancheros Sergeant-at-Arms, Colin Campbell, explained that he and his brothers caught their supreme leader, William Ross, in an inappropriate position with a member's wife. Now these were dead serious allegations against what was considered one of the club's 10 commandments. Rule 4 specifically stated, any member found guilty of screwing another member's old lady or taking advantage of a rift between couples for future conning will be thrown out. As Sergeant-at-Arms, Campbell explained that he had no choice but to order Ross to face the charges. If found guilty, it would again lay upon him to expel his boss. Interestingly, the Supreme Leader never showed up at the first two summons. According to Campbell, Ross only briefly showed up in the third meeting and announced that the club would now have two operating bases. He simply said this and walked out. In short, those who supported the charges were allowed to split and form their own chapter. Those included the six Campbell brothers, Anthony Spencer, the McElwain brothers, and Charles Scaberos. However, years later in a 2019 interview, Ross himself laid forward a contradicting account of what led to the split. He said everything started falling apart after moving to the clubhouse headquarters from Harris Park into a Birch Grove waterside mansion. To him, the move was necessary to accommodate the club's ever-growing numbers as younger people took up to the colors. Ross then painfully explained that it was this youngin' generation that caused him the worst headaches. You see, they weren't remotely as disciplined as the older Comancheros. They took to drugs and partying more than honoring the club's traditions. All day every day, they hosted drinking sprees decorated with metal music and frequent brawls. Slowly, they started despising Ross's guts. They didn't like the authoritarian rule, but most specifically, they hated his weekly drills. One former Comanchero passionately told the media, "If I wanted to march around in the fucking backyard, I would have joined the fucking army." Eventually, Ross and his older club members had enough and decided to return to Harris Park. They simply couldn't keep up with the wilding younger Comancheros and let them stay at the mansion as they retreated to what they were so familiar with. He did this thinking it would ease the tension between the two generations, but he was terribly wrong. To this day, he still bitterly regrets that decision. With Spencer as the new Birch Grove Comancheros president, the chapter worsened with time. However, what he did next forever changed Australia's outlaw biker scene. You see, sometime in 1981, he embarked on a quest as one of his first acts as chapter president. Fellow bikers sent him to the United States to buy Harley-Davidson motorcycle parts, most of which were difficult and expensive to obtain in Australia. As Spencer was shopping around, he came across the Texas Bandidos Motorcycle Club. Specifically, he came across the then national president of the Bandidos, Ronald Hodge, also known as Mr. Prospect. Spencer was quickly enamored with how they treated him with so much kindness and respect, so he was even more ecstatic when they mentioned doing business with him. Hodge pitched his idea of opening a multinational pipeline selling legitimate and stolen motorcycle parts in Australia. In return, all Spencer had to do was agree to a patchover. The young Comanchero president confirmed, and it was perhaps the Bandidos' most impressive achievement so far. Hodge wanted more than motorcycle parts. He wanted Australia's P2P, a chemical necessary in the manufacture of amphetamine. Not only was it cheaper down south, but also legal. On top of that, he had also managed to establish the first Bandidos chapter outside the US, making it a multinational motorcycle club. Back home, everyone in the Birch Grove chapter readily agreed to the patchover and couldn't wait to put down their Comanchero colors. Surprisingly, Ross commented that even though he felt betrayed, he was relieved when he heard the news. He was even somewhat glad. Ross and his older Comancheros were fed up with the Birch Grove chapter. In his own words, "We didn't want him." According to him, it wasn't the changeover that ticked him off, but more so how Spencer and his men did it. So it was only fair that Ross demanded the Birch Grove mansion that belonged to the Comancheros. But not only did Spencer refuse to give it back, some of his men also burned their former colors in what was considered the highest form of bikey disrespect. With that, the first strings of tension were tightened between the Comancheros and the newly formed Bandidos. The next few months saw the two clubs' members exchange fists whenever they met in taverns and pubs. One particular incident on August 9, 1984, saw three Comancheros brutally beaten up by the Bandidos. Teeth were lost, but it wasn't anything lethal. However, one afternoon, someone crossed the line. Ross recalled being trailed and knocked off his bike by a mysterious vehicle. Investigations were unnecessary. Everyone knew who was behind the wheel. The Supreme Leader quickly picked up the phone to confront Spencer, and after exchanging a few harsh words, the two national presidents officially declared war starting August 11, 1984. They set boundaries that no brawls would happen in public or other members' homes. However, egos grew, and one afternoon, reason was thrown out the window. That day was Father's Day, Sunday, September 2nd, 1984. Contrary to what happened, Sunday, September 2nd had the potential to be a great day. Not only was it Father's Day, but the British Motorcycle Club had organized a well-packed swap meet at the Milperra Vikings Tavern. This is a special day when bikers set aside their differences and meet under friendly banners, enjoy barbecues, and shop for new and used motorcycle parts and memorabilia. Families often accompany their bike enthusiast fathers to the event, hoping to not only have a great time, but also looking out for the perfect gift for the old man. According to witness accounts, the day started well, and everyone was enjoying themselves, patiently waiting for lunch's delicacy. However, at around 1 p.m., the rumbling bellies would be overpowered by the sounds of 19 Comanchero bikies as they thundered into the Viking Tavern parking lot. Since it was a bikers event, this wasn't supposed to be a big deal. Nonetheless, several people couldn't help but feel something was wrong. The vibe suddenly turned cold, and it was hard to ignore the rifle scabbards fastened onto their handles. The Supreme Commander Jock Ross slowly got up from his motorcycle, walkie-talkie in hand. He seemed to have planned out everything, and without warning, motioned his men into positions. The idea was to lay bait, slowly wait for their bandito targets, and quickly devour them into a pincer movement. Ross was so confident with this tactic that he set himself as bait to lure in Spencer and his young bandito comrades. 10 minutes passed, and the Australian banditos were nowhere to be seen. The Comancheros were getting impatient, and some men distracted. Even Ross himself perhaps didn't have the discipline to wait any longer, and decided to walk into the bar and have a drink. 10 minutes passed, and it was now 1:20 p.m. Most Comancheros were off their posts and scattered across the tavern. However, moments later, the banditos showed up. With 34 motorcycles in total, the Comancheros were not only caught off guard, but also severely outnumbered. On top of that, the banditos also brought along several cars and vans full of assortments of weapons. Just like the Comancheros, they also had a plan. They quickly parked at the western end of the car park, distributed guns and weapons among their ranks, and immediately confronted their rivals. Witnesses testified that the initial confrontation was far from lethal. Even though both sides were armed, they would only exchange hurtful words as they dared each other to put down the guns and fight like men. However, peace only lasted so long as an accidental shotgun was discharged into the air. Then, as if possessed, both parties suddenly charged at each other with fists, guns, chains, baseball bats, knives, machetes, and any other weapons they could get their hand on. Contrary to what some newspapers reported, no battle lines were drawn. And although the media or the police never mentioned it, some civilians noted that several of the bikies' wives and girlfriends took part in the war. Bandito Sergeant at Arms, Campbell, confirmed this, claiming that one wife of the Comancheros shot him several times with a handgun. His brother, Gregory Campbell, was the first to fall, after taking a bullet in the throat, dying instantly. The Banditos' vice president soon followed suit, after taking 2 shotgun rounds in the chest, also dying instantly. Not long after, a Comanchero had his arm chopped off as the flames of battle grew wilder. Around 7 meters from the battlefield, 14-year-old Leanne was shocked from what was unfolding before her very eyes. One witness explained that one bikie seemed to be in a rage, firing in all directions, when suddenly, in what felt like a blink of an eye, the young girl beside him dropped to the ground. Upon further observation, it horribly dawned on him that she had taken a full shotgun blast in the face. Meanwhile, Ross was still at the back of the tavern when all of this was happening. Perhaps deafened by old age or pub music, it took him a few moments to finally hear what was going on outside. As realization dawned upon him, he quickly threw away his drink, charging into the battlefield waving a machete in one hand and a pick handle in the other. Media reports stated he shouted, "Kill them all," as he ran to meet his rivals. Ross would later defend himself, saying he never uttered such words. He insisted that he never used his machete, he only drew it back, threatening to slay one bandito if he didn't withdraw. Unknown to him, that would be his last memory of the day. Seconds later, Ross took a bullet to the foot, forcing him to stumble forward. It was shortly followed by another round into his chest that took him down. The gunman went even further and leashed another one into his head, knocking out teeth and penetrating his brain. At this point, the situation was beyond salvaging. Around 400 innocent civilians ran about as others lay on the ground, with many taking cover behind their vehicles. Everyone feared that they might get a bullet in the back. One such was young Linda, sitting inside her pickup truck reading a book before a round hit her windscreen, forcing her to take cover. In what she described as a confusing flood of emotions, she went from fear to anger. Linda was angry with what the bikies were doing and bravely risked her life by taking 7 pictures of what was going on. In her own words, her camera was a weapon, and she was going to shoot with it. Her photos eventually stood as cornerstone evidence against the Comancheros and Bandidos bikies. It wasn't long before news reached the nearest police station that a man had gone berserk with a rifle at the Milperra Tavern. Unfortunately, the first of more than 200 police officers arrived 15 minutes after the fighting ended. The Milperra Massacre, or as many call it, the Father's Day Massacre, lasted about 10 minutes, with around 30 shots fired. By the time the gun smoke cleared up, 7 people lay dead, and 28 more were injured, with 20 needing hospitalization. Constable John Garvey was among the first officers to arrive at the scene wearing plain clothes, a move he could have easily regretted. In a brave effort to neutralize the situation, he took it upon himself to enter the tavern through the back door, when he was rudely confronted by Comanchero Raymond, armed with a shotgun, finger on the trigger. After revealing his identity as a police officer, Raymond asked him to call an ambulance for his injured men. Garvey took this as an opportunity to get Raymond and his Comancheros to surrender their weapons. After a rather tense argument, both agreed to put their shotguns on the ground. The bikie then took Garvey to the battlefield, where with stretched arms, all bikers still standing gave him their weapons. The Vikings' car park was painted with blood and dead bodies, as injured bikers moaned in pain. Those who regained their senses were about now coming to terms with what they had done, as traumatized innocents kept screaming in the background. Even though no arrests were made that night, the authorities under Ron Stevenson immediately launched Operation Hard Rock, which gave many investigators sleepless nights with over 400 interviewees. Linda's 7 detailed photos went a long way towards establishing who was where during the incident and the faces behind the carnage. Eventually, all the responsible Comancheros and Bandidos were arrested pending prosecution in what would be Australia's longest and most expensive trial, costing around $12 million. 1,500 jurors were summoned and hosted at the Penrith Leagues Club to await selection. Eventually, after close scrutiny, only 12 were capable enough to sit on the case, and thus, the court proceedings began for the 31 accused. Before we continue, I've got a quick word to share from the people who made this video possible. I'm talking about the amazing wireless audio brand and this video's sponsor, Raycon. The design and development for Raycon earbuds are all done in-house with their small but impressive team of audio engineers. Amazingly, they've been able to create earbuds that come in about half the price as other premium brands, while having the same if not better sound quality. They feature immersive noise isolation, 8 hours of battery life, sweat and water resistance, and my favorite, the unbelievably comfortable and secure fit. I was shocked at how they didn't fall out of my ears no matter what activity I was doing, and didn't hurt even after extended use. This is due to them being masterfully designed after countless iterations to seamlessly fit the curvature of the human ear. I love using my Raycon everyday earbuds for everything, from casually watching sports highlights to actually playing sports. Click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/hoodchronicles to get 15% off your Raycon purchase as well as supporting our channel. Now let's get back into the story. At least 58 policemen were deployed during each session, including armed tactical operations unit members stationed in the courtroom. On top of that, witnesses also required armed guards from the witness security unit to escort them home. Even though the 7 photos served as concrete evidence, Linda was also required to testify before the jury. It wasn't easy for the 23-year-old who saw bikers and supporting enthusiasts throw cutthroat signals at her as she walked through the court corridors. In a 2019 interview, she explained that she would later spend at least 20 years receiving death threats and changing towns and jobs, fearing for her life. More than 2 years later, on June 12, 1987, the jury delivered 63 murder, 174 manslaughter, and 31 affray convictions. Ross was named the instigator of the violence because, as club president, he was primarily responsible for the decision of his members to go to Milperra in force and armed. He and 4 other Comancheros received life sentences for murder. 16 Bandidos were also found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 7 years behind bars. Anthony Spencer, the national president of the Bandidos, committed suicide in prison before he could stand trial. Prison authorities found a suicide note beside his hanging body in which he apologized to his brothers and family for all that had transpired. 2 years later, in 1989, 3 Comancheros successfully appealed their murder convictions, which were subsequently reduced to manslaughter. Finally, in 1992, Jock Ross was the last Milperra bikie released. He served the longest sentence at 5 years and 3 months. Following the incident, the New South Wales government wanted to ensure that nothing like this ever happened again, and updated the Firearms and Dangerous Weapons Act. It strictly stated that a good reason was henceforth required for the issue of a firearm license. The previous law allowed registered owners the right to carry firearms in public. In both 1994 and 2019 interviews, Ross confidently stated that he could look himself in the mirror knowing he was not to blame for what happened in Milperra. According to him, his men were attacked. He didn't kill anyone, only acted in self-defense, and all he got were bullets and a 5-year sentence. As always, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. Also comment down below letting us know what you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching and have a good one.